Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Prodigy channel, and in this video, I'm going to give you my top stardoms and situms heading into Week 10 of the 2021 Fantasy Football season. I'm actually recording this on Saturday of Week 10, so the Thursday games have already happened, the game between the Ravens and the Dolphins, so I'm not going to talk about any starts or sits in that game, but I'll talk about some starts and sits for the rest of the week. But before we get into Week 10, I do need to recap our Week 9 calls quickly. So at quarterback, I liked Joe Burrow as a low to mid quarterback 1, finished as the quarterback 23 with only 9.38 fantasy points, so that was a miss. And by the way, this is according to the Fantasy Pro scoring, which I think has -1 for interceptions when a lot of places do -2, so just keep that in mind. I also said I like Tua as a low quarterback 1, high quarterback 2 in Week 9. Well, he did play that game, so that was whatever. But yeah, Joe Burrow was a miss. I said I liked Nick Chubb as a low running back 1. Moving out of the running back starts of last week, he finished as the running back 3 on the week overall with 29.3 half PPR fantasy points. So that was a huge hit, and I will be giving all the scoring in half point PPR unless I say otherwise. That's kind of just a scoring I go off of by default. My second and final running back start of Week 9 was Josh Jacobs. I liked him as a mid to high running back 2, and he finished as the running back 18 with 11.5 fantasy points. So that was a nice solid play right there, nice little hit. At wide receiver, my calls of playing Brandin Cooks as a wide receiver 2 and Emmanuel Sanders as a low wide receiver 2, high wide receiver 3, they didn't really pan out. They weren't busts. They weren't really nice, like great plays either. They were just okay. Cooks as the wide receiver 29, Sanders as a wide receiver 30, both about 8.5 fantasy points. So yeah, not really huge hits, not huge busts either, just kind of whatever. And then at tight end, I had a couple bad calls here. I liked Mike Gesicki, and remember, this is Week 9, so in Week 10, Gesicki played in Week 10 against the Ravens. He had a goose, but I liked him in Week 9. He finished as a tight end 17 with 7.4 points, and Dallas Goedert was another play I talked about. He finished as a tight end 23 with 5.8 points, so those are both misses. So yeah, there were some good calls, some bad calls. And then I had a few sits last week. I said to sit Trevor Lawrence against the Bills. He finished as a quarterback 28, only 5.12 fantasy points. He did leave early in that game, but I think he wasn't doing the greatest before he left. And it was a good call. You know, if you sat him, then, you know, that was a good decision. So it's kind of weird when injuries get factored in, but it is what it is. And then Sam Darnold I had listed as a sit him. He finished horrible, quarterback 29, only 4.78 points against the Patriots. So that was another hit, a really good call from myself. And then at running back, I had one sit-em. It was Mike Davis of the Falcons, a player that we're going to talk about in this video as well. And yeah, that was a good call. He finished as a running back 61, only 2.3 half PPR points. That was a big hit for us. And then at wide receiver, I had two sit-ems. Allen Robinson, he finished as a wide receiver 27, 8.8 fantasy points. I said I wouldn't play him as anything more than a wide receiver 4. So he did exceed those expectations, but it's not like if you sat him, you're like, dang it, you know, I should have played him. But 8.8 half PPR points, it doesn't sink your lineup, and it doesn't really boost your lineup either. Just kind of whatever. And then Jakobi Meyers, I said to sit him. He was the wide receiver 87 on the week with only 1.3 fantasy points. So that was another big hit for us. So now with that being said, we are ready to move on to my Week 10 stardoms and situms. So I'm going to start with my Week 10 stardoms, then move on to the situms, go position by position. And we're going to start with my stardom quarterbacks. I have two of them. The first one is going to be Carson Wentz of the Indianapolis Colts. He has been really good for fantasy. You can see his fantasy scoring right there. He's been over 20 points each of the last 3 weeks. And for me, this Jacksonville matchup doesn't scare me. So he is a low quarterback 1, high quarterback 2 play for me in Week 10. And next up, as a quarterback stardom, we have Aaron Rodgers of the Green Bay Packers. He is expected to start in Week 10 against the Seattle Seahawks after missing Week 9 while on the reserve COVID list. So obviously, if he isn't starting, he is not going to be a stardom. But last I heard, he is expected to start. He is going to be playing in Green Bay at home, where he has been really awesome. And I expect him to be a locked-in quarterback 1 play this week after returning from that COVID list. Now we're going to move on to my stardom running backs, and this is the position that I have the most players to talk about. I have 5 players on this list, okay? So they're not all equal. So when I say I have a player as a stardom, you know, I'm going to talk about where I like them as. So some players I'll like as a really elite play. Another guy I'll like as kind of like a bye week fill-in. So, you know, just pay attention to that, okay? But James Conner is the first player that I'm going to talk about, running back for the Arizona Cardinals. He has a matchup with the Carolina Panthers defense. So that's a pretty tough matchup, but he is the clear starter in Arizona with Chase Edmonds now on injured reserve. He took over during last week's game against San Francisco, and he took full advantage of that opportunity, finishing as the running back 1 overall on the week. As you can see, almost 40 half-point PPR fantasy points. He had 2 rushing touchdowns, a receiving touchdown. I mean, a great yardage. So he was awesome last week. And while I don't expect another 3-touchdown game or a running back 1 overall finish this week, he will continue to have a boost in value as long as Chase Edmonds is out. And I love him this week as a low running back 1. Next up, we got Melvin Gordon, running back of the Denver Broncos. So I just have him on this list because I feel like the fantasy community has been sort of stuck waiting for rookie running back Javonte Williams to take over the Denver backfield. And we've been waiting for that for so long that I feel like Melvin Gordon is sometimes overlooked or ignored as a solid fantasy contributor. So this week, the Broncos are taking on the Philadelphia Eagles, who are giving up the 11th most fantasy points to running backs. And if you're wondering what chart I'm using to get that from, so I just go to this Fantasy Pros chart, and there are the Philadelphia Eagles. They're giving up the 11th most points to fantasy running backs. So it's not a bad matchup at all. And he should see solid volume, and he is always a threat to score. He can get in the end zone. So I do like him as a mid running back 2 play this week. The next running back we're going to talk about is Cordarrelle Patterson of the Atlanta Falcons. And as you can see by his fantasy points, he has been awesome all season. He's shown consistency, and yet he's also shown upside with games over 20 points, 30 points. And even if he's not getting that, he's at least in the teens every single week in half-point PPR, other than week 1, right? So he's been awesome for fantasy. And now he gets a pretty good matchup with the Dallas Cowboys. They're giving up the 12th most points to running backs on the season, according to this chart. And he's just been great. So it's kind of hard at this point to take him out of your lineup. This game could be high scoring, which gives Cordarrelle Patterson upside if it, turns out to be a back and forth scoring affair with lots of scoring opportunities for Patterson. But again, he has been so consistent this season that even if there isn't that crazy scoring in this game, it is nearly impossible to take him out of your lineups at this point. So for me, he is a low to mid running back play this week. Moving on to my next stardom running back, we're going to talk about Darrel Williams of the Kansas City Chiefs. He is still filling in for an injured Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and I do like him in this matchup against the Raiders. They have given up some nice fantasy performances to running backs. He should see some good volume and get a few catches out of the backfield. And also, if you notice this pattern, obviously this is stupid logic, but over double digits, single digits, double digits, single digits, double digits, single digits. So if you follow the pattern, he's locked in for double digits this week, right? So obviously kidding, but I do like him this week. And in fact, I like him as a kind of like a solid mid running back 2 start. Now, remember when I talked at the beginning of this section about how not all of these running back stardoms are created equal? Right. So this is why I preface this, okay? So we're going to talk about Mark Ingram of the Saints. Now, obviously, I don't like him more than guys like James Conner or Cordarrelle Patterson, but he gets a great opportunity this week as like a bye week fill-in. And honestly, I kind of like him as a nice little running back 2 play. So he does have, he is a great play this week. That's why I'm talking about it, right? These are stardoms for a reason. So we're going to talk about Mark Ingram here of the New Orleans Saints. Alvin Kamara, their starting running back, their superstar player, has been ruled out for this matchup against the Titans. So Ingram should see the lion's share of the backfield, and he should see enough volume to be a nice running back 2 play this week. We are now going to move on to the wide receiver position, where I have 2 players that I feel really especially strong about. And the first one, it's sort of a high-end player already, but I like him even more than usual this week. And that's going to be Mike Evans, wide receiver of the Tampa Bay Bucks. So Antonio Brown is out for this game. Rob Gronkowski is still out. And then Chris Godwin is a game-time decision, although last I heard, there is a good chance that he plays. But regardless, I do like Mike Evans this week. You have an elite Tampa Bay offense in a great matchup with the Washington football team. So Mike Evans has insane upside and insane safety and security this week, just because of the players that are out. Godwin is banged up, and this is a great matchup with the Washington football team. If we go over to wide receiver here, you can type in Washington, and they're giving up the second most points to fantasy wide receivers on the season. So they have been a target for fantasy managers all year long. So in this one, with the injuries, with the matchup, I just love Mike Evans this week. And Tom Brady will likely look to his boy, Mike Evans, a ton in this matchup. And he is an awesome wide receiver 1 play this week for me. And our second and final stardom wide receiver is Michael Pittman Jr. of the Indianapolis Colts. He has been awesome so far for fantasy, especially lately. If you look at his last 3 games, he has been on fire. And now he gets to take on a Jacksonville defense that really doesn't scare me. It can get exposed. I know they kind of shut down the Bills last week, but I'm going to bet on Michael Pittman Jr. continuing to at least be solid, if not great for fantasy in this one. So for me, he is a low wide receiver 1, high wide receiver 2 play in week 10. Next, we're going to talk about a couple tight end stardoms really quickly. The first one is going to be Pat Freiermuth of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He has been hot and takes on a Detroit defense that doesn't really scare me. You can see how great he's been the last few weeks. 9.3 fantasy points by week. In the last couple weeks, he's been very involved. He's been a little bit touchdown dependent. The yardage hasn't really been there, but I would not be surprised if we see him get in the end zone against this Detroit defense. So, and for most tight end plays, you really are relying on that touchdown. So it's not like Pat Freiermuth is the only one where he's a little touchdown dependent, right? So for me in this matchup, he is a low tight end 1 play with some upside. And I know I was just talking about guys who are a little touchdown dependent, but my next tight end stardom actually offers a solid yardage baseline, at least when it comes to tight ends, and that's Dan Arnold of the Jacksonville Jags. So he is just a solid play most weeks. You can see his yardage totals. While it's nothing outstanding, when you're talking about, kind of low-end tight ends, like low tight end 1 type of players, this yardage is actually really nice. Obviously, it's no Kelsey or Kittle type of numbers or Waller, but you know what I'm saying, right? It's very solid for a guy that maybe you can get off the waiver wire right now. So he has been a solid play so far most weeks, and the matchup with Indianapolis is favorable in terms of fantasy points given up to tight ends. I'll show you just quickly where they rank. They are giving up the, where is this? 6th? Oh, that was weird how that goes 7 and 6. So they're like tied for 6, it looks like, with the Houston Texans for fantasy points given up to tight ends. Whatever, they give up some points to tight ends, okay? That's all I'm trying to say. So for me in this matchup, with the yardage that he offers most weeks, with the matchup, he is a solid low tight end 1, high tight end 2 start. All right, now we're going to move on to my sit-ems this week. I only have 3 players to talk about. The first one, we're going to start with 1 quarterback, and that is Baker Mayfield, quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. Even with their running backs in Cleveland, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt out for this game, I still don't expect Baker to light it up on the road in a tough matchup with New England, who are allowing the 4th fewest points of fantasy points, according to this little chart right here. The quarterbacks are giving up the 4th fewest. So yeah, it's a tough matchup, and they're on the road in New England, which is notoriously a difficult place to play. So I do think this will also be a low-scoring game. I don't expect it to be like a high-scoring affair with the offense just lighting it up, going back and forth, right? So there's not going to be a ton of points scored, in my opinion, in general. So for me, in Week 10, Baker Mayfield is nothing more than a low quarterback 2. And he's also sort of an uninspiring start in 2 quarterback leagues if you're desperate. Now we're going to move on to my one and only running back sit-em, and it's the same guy as last week, and a guy that has really been annoying me all season because I loved him coming into the season, during the draft period, but he's been very disappointing, and that is Mike Davis of the Atlanta Falcons. So just in case you guys have not caught on, Mike Davis has taken a backseat to Cordarrelle Patterson in Atlanta. I'm sure you guys have already caught on that Mike Davis is not a very good start most weeks, but just in case, here's a reminder. And even with the volume that he has seen, which hasn't been a ton, but when he has seen some decent volume, he has been a little ineffective. And honestly, I say his volume hasn't been great, but look, he's seeing double-digit carries a lot of the games, or close to it. He's seeing a decent amount of targets some weeks, but he just hasn't really done anything with it. So I don't know why that would really change this week. And let's just say it does happen, then okay, that's the outlier. You just have to go with the data that we have and what we've seen on the field from him. He's only cracked double digits in scoring 1 time, right? So he's been horrible. So just in general, I would recommend not playing Mike Davis. If he gets in the end zone or something, okay, you live with it, but he's way too risky to play right now. And our final sit-em that we're going to talk about on this list is wide receiver Elijah Moore of the New York Jets. So he is coming off of a huge game, and it is tempting to put him in your lineups. He's been a hyped up player for the Jets, and he finally had, that breakout game, right? So a lot of people, I can be tempted to put him in their lineups. And I had a DraftKings lineup, and I put him in the lineup, and I was stoked to see him have that big game. That big game was 7 for 84 and 2 touchdowns. So again, it's tempting to want to play that type of production. Again, just chase the points. However, last week's matchup with the Colts is much better than this week's matchup with the Bills, who are really not giving up much points to wide receivers. In fact, let's just take a look at the chart. So the Colts they're near the league lead in points given up to wide receivers. And then if you talk about the Bills, they're giving up the fewest points to fantasy wide receivers in the entire NFL. So already that, limits his upside. And also, the Jets did not have Corey Davis last week, who's one of their, top-tier wide receivers on the team. They did not have him in Week 9. And Corey Davis, as of this recording, is expected to return in Week 10, which will potentially cut into Elijah Moore's opportunities to catch passes, score touchdowns, get yards, all that stuff. So for me, Elijah Moore is a wide receiver 4 play at best. Maybe a guy you add onto your bench to see how things play out over the course of the season. But definitely with this matchup with Corey Davis coming back, he's someone that I am trying to avoid this week if possible. All right, y'all, that's going to do it for our Week 10 Stardom Sit-em video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please make sure to drop a like if you did, in fact, enjoy the video or if you found it helpful. Subscribe to the channel for more fantasy football content. Talk to you guys later. Peace out.